Something moved. A shadow, soft and darting over the mashed remains some 20 feet in front of her, and at the same time Claire heard a strange, rasping sound, breathing. And she looked up, still not sure what she was seeing or hearing. That ragged breathing and the tick of talons on wood, the talons themselves thick and curved, the claws of a creature that couldn't exist. Big, the size of a full-grown man, but the resemblance ended there, and it was so impossible that she could only see it in pieces, her mind struggling to put them together. The inflamed, purplish flesh of the naked, long-limbed creature that clung to the ceiling, the puffed, gray-white tissue of the partially exposed brain, the scar-rimmed holes where the eyes should have been. Not seeing this. The creature's rounded head dropped back, and the wide jaw opening, a ropey stream of dark drool pouring out and splattering over what was left of the cup. It extended its tongue, alien pink, the rough surface shimmering wetly as it slithered down, and out, and out. The snaking tongue uncoiled, whipping from side to side, so long that it actually trailed through the ripped flesh of the corpse. The creature opened its mouth again, and screamed. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my humble abode, which is actually, I need more mood lighting here. That's the best we're going to get. And welcome to Let's Read Resident Evil, City of the Bed. City of the Bed. And also, I'm not doing the right voice. Welcome to Let's Read Resident Evil, City of the Dead. This is one of my favorite novels from when I was younger. I was intended to read the very first novel in the series, but I forgot that I lent that out to a friend and never got it back. So, that little prologue gives you a nice little taste of what's to come in this. I find the descriptions very, very enthralling. The profile picture is, autistic is City of the Bed. Yes, it is City of the Bed. Oh, it's a proper book, not a comic. Yeah, it's not a comic. It's an actual book. These are written by S.D. Perry. The first one was written, I want to say, in 1998, after the first game. Then she wrote her own original story in the setting. And then this would happen to be number 3 in the franchise. Oddly enough, the novelization of the second game. And this is actually the book that got me into Resident Evil. I'm trying to remember, I think I bought this one first, but I then bought the first novel and read that one because I wanted to start from the very beginning. The fun fact about this series is that the very first book in it, the Resident Evil, The Umbrella Conspiracy, gave me nightmares as a child. And so I actually had to keep it here in the study while I slept in my room over that way. And so, what is it? Like The Merchant of Venice or Death in Venice? Why, though? Why is it the title, is the title Death in Venezia? Are you fucking kidding me? It takes place in Italy. So, Maxim Circuit, what are you talking about? How many books have they made? This, I want to say like 9? 1 minute, I'm gonna go check. I was wrong, it wasn't 9, it was 7. Because I have here the 5th and 6th books in the series, which are Resident Evil Nemesis and Resident Evil Code Veronica, which were already subtitled, which made subtitling the books easier, as opposed to Resident Evil, Umbrella Conspiracy, Resident Evil, City of the Dead, which I imagine she came up with on her own. These are decent books too. These are my lesser favorites. The first two are, or should I say, the Umbrella Conspiracy, City of the Dead, and Case Zero, I believe it is, or I think it was just called Zero. Let me check on. Nah, I'm not gonna check on that. The one that was basically the zeroth book, the prologue book, which is the novelization of Resident Evil Zero. Those three are my favorite. Well, these two are sort of. I mean, Nemesis is all right. The one that's really the weakest is Code Veronica's book, and it's not really because of anything you'd expect. It's just it feels really abrupt at the end. It's a very interesting little series of books, but I'm holding off too long. Hopefully, audio gains are perfectly fine. I'd rather get into this. No, the robe I've had for a long time. The robe is pretty styling. I'm very happy with it. I haven't worn this in like forever, so I feel like this is a fitting circumstance. It's a little rainy outside. It's nice and warm in here, and why not share a good book with a bunch of your dozen favorite fans and friends? So, just so you know, this is technically the third book in the franchise. So there's a few things, a little housekeeping matters at the very beginning that won't be mentioned. I also won't be getting through the whole book tonight. I plan to end this around 9 p.m. my time, which is 3 hours from now. I don't even know if I can keep going that long. I'm probably going to be reading this outside of my normal accent, because when I learned how to read out loud, like reading off scripts is actually really difficult for me sometimes, because I naturally want to go into what I did when I used to sing. And I sang in high school, I had to use a different accent because I needed to mesh up with my colleagues. That, and I was trying to hide it, and it was all. So I speak much more fluently when I'm reading in a much flatter tone. So I might go with that. Oh, thank you. Blue is the eyes, I think. So I'm going to try reading this. I'm going to see how long I can go. I'm hoping to get 3 hours down through a couple of chapters of this, and then then I'll probably do another stream where I can, read out the rest of the book. This book is about 300 so pages, a little more than that. Yeah, the franchise, I love the Resident Evil franchise. But yes, I want to jump right into this and have very little commentary. If you want to have some kind of note, please go to if you want to donate to the stream and get your comments visualized on screen. There is a link down in the description below for Streamlabs. Please use that. Do not super chat. Super chat, they steal a garbage amount of money from that. But I will answer questions that are Streamlabbed. I'll try to answer most of them that I see, but because my eyes are going to be down here most of the time, I'm not going to be able to read the chat quite as consistently. But let's just jump into it. I'm very excited for this. Evil unchecked grows. Evil tolerated poisons the whole system. Jawaharlal Nehru. City of the Dead. Prologue. Raccoon Times, August 26, 1998. Mayor announces Keep City Safe plan. Raccoon City. On the front steps of City Hall, Mayor Harris announced in a press conference yesterday afternoon that the City Council will be hiring at least 10 new police officers. Oh, wait. I forgot. That's what we were missing. We'll be hiring at least 10 new police officers to join the Raccoon Police in response to the continued suspension of the Special Tactics and Rescue Squad, STARS. In effect since the brutal murders that plagued Raccoon City earlier this summer. Joined by Police Chief Brian Irons and all of Raccoon City's council members, Harris assured the gathered citizens and reporters that Raccoon City will once again be a safe community in which to live and work, and that the investigation into the 11 cannibal murders and 3 fatal wild animal attacks is far from closed. Just because no one else has been attacked in the last month does not mean the elected officials of the city can relax, Harris stated. The good people of Raccoon deserve to have confidence in their police force and to be secure in the knowledge that their political representatives are doing everything possible to ensure each citizen's safety. As many of you know, the STARS suspension is likely to become permanent. That unit's gross mishandling of the murder investigations and the subsequent disappearance from Raccoon City suggests that they don't care about this community. But I want to assure you that we care. That myself, Chief Irons, and the men and women that you see here today want nothing more than to make Raccoon City a place in which our children can grow without fear. Harris went on in detail a 3-point plan designed to bolster public confidence and to keep Raccoon citizens from falling victim to violence. Besides hiring between 10 and 12 new police officers, the citywide curfew will remain in place through at least September, and Chief Irons will personally head a task force of several officers and detectives to continue searching for the killers who took the lives of 11 people between May and July of this year. Cityside, September 4th, 1998. Renovations of Umbrella Complex planned. Raccoon City. The Umbrella Chemical Plant just south of downtown Raccoon is due for major construction efforts slated to begin next month. This will be the third... okay, just making sure the sound... is the sound... is the sound okay, guys? Are you hearing the music, too? It should be very soft. I'm trying to make sure it's not super overloading. Guys, hello. Is this stream live? Oh, I will assume that the sound is good. This is the third of such structural renovations in the last year for the thriving pharmaceutical company. According to Umbrella's spokesperson Amanda Whitney, 2 of the laboratories inside the main plant will be fitted with several $1 million worth of new equipment designed for vaccine synthesis, and the building itself will receive state-of-the-art security systems. In addition, all of the connected offices buildings will be upgrading computers over the next several weeks, but this will be a problem for downtown traffic? Said Whitney, with the Raccoon Police Building just finishing up another of their renovations, we know the local commuters will be getting pretty tired of the blocked streets. We're going to do our best not to get in the way of downtown traffic. Most of the construction is internal, and the rest will be doing after business hours. The courtyard in front of the RPD building, our readers may remember, was recently repaved and landscaped after several mysterious cracks appeared in the cement and topsoil. Traffic had been diverted around 2 blocks of Tall Oak Street for 6 days. When asked why so many overhauls as of late, Whitney replied, "Umbrella has stayed ahead of the competition for as long as it has by keeping up with current technology. It's going to be a busy couple of months, but I think it'll be well worth the effort when we're finally through." Let's see. Okay, sounds fine. Just making sure I got that. I do plan on doing a bad fanfiction stream with my friend Sync at some time in the future. And she has promised to do a workout routine to it every time there's something bad happens, and we actually hashed out some rules for that. It's gonna be fun. Raccoon City Weekly Editorial, September 17th, 1998. Irons to run. Raccoon City. Mayor Harris may be in for a tough race next spring. Weekly sources inside the RPD are saying that Brian Irons, the chief of police for the last 4.5 years, may be running for the city's top office in the next election, facing off against popular as of yet unopposed Devlin Harris, already in office for 3 consecutive terms. Although Irons would not confirm his possible entry into the political arena, the one-time STARS member also refused to deny the rumor. With his approval rating at an all-time high ever since the cessation of the summer's savage murders, as of yet unsolved, and the planned expansion of the RPD, Chief Irons may indeed be the man to knock Harris out of City Hall. The question is, will voters be able to forget Irons' alleged involvement in the 1994 Cider District land scam, or this rather extensive taste in art and interior design, which have turned up parts of the RPD building into something more akin to a museum than a working office? Assuming he means to throw his hat into the ring, this reporter, for one, will be looking forward to examining Irons' financial records. Raccoon Times, September 22nd, 1998. Teenager attacked in City Park. Raccoon City. At approximately 6:30 p.m. last night, 14-year-old Shanna Williamson was accosted by a mysterious stranger in downtown Birch Street Park on the way home from softball practice. The man came out from behind a row of hedges at the south end of the park and knocked Miss Williamson off her bicycle before attempting to grab her. The teen managed to get away with only a few scratches, running to the nearby residence of Tom and Clara Atkinson. Mrs. Atkinson alerted the authorities, who conducted a thorough search of the park but found no sign of the attacker. According to the girl, though police statement issued earlier this morning, the man appeared to be a transient. His clothes and hair were dirty, and she described the bad odor coming from him, a smell like rotten fruit. She also said that he seemed drunk, staggering and falling after her as she ran. With the plague of cannibalistic murders from May to July still unsolved, the RPD is taking Miss Williamson's encounter very seriously. The assailant bears a striking resemblance to eyewitness reports of the gang members spotted in Victoria Park last June. Mayor Harris has called a press conference later today, and Police Chief Brian Irons has stated already that with the first of the newly hired police officers expected next week, regular patrols will extend the routines to include downtown park blocks. And now, Chapter 1. I'm actually use the restroom in a minute here, and I'll after this chapter. Let's see. September 26, 1998. With the guys waiting outside in Barry's truck, Jill did her best to hurry. It wasn't easy. The house had been tossed. Since the last time she'd been there. The floors were strewn with books and papers, and it was too dark to navigate around the debris easily. That her small home had been violated was upsetting, though not much of a surprise. She figured she'd just be thankful that she wasn't really the sentimental type, and that the intruders hadn't managed to find her passport. She grabbed handfuls of clean socks and underwear in the cramped darkness of the bedroom and stuffed them deep into the weathered backpack, wishing she could turn on the lights. Packing a bag in the dark was harder than it sounded, would be even if one's house hadn't been trashed, but she knew they couldn't afford to take any chances. It was unlikely that Umbrella still had any of their houses staked out, but if there was anyone watching, a light in the window would draw fire. At least you're getting out. No more hiding. At least you're getting out. No more hiding. It's kind of weird. She has italicized thoughts in here, so trying to convey that's going to be interesting. There was that much. They were headed for foreign soil to storm enemy headquarters and very likely get killed in the process, but at least she wouldn't have to hang out in Raccoon anymore. And from what she'd read in the papers lately, maybe that was for the best. 2 attacks in the last week. Chris and Barry were skeptical about the danger, even knowing that the T-virus did to people. Barry thought it was some kind of PR stunt, that Umbrella would rescue Raccoon before anyone got hurt. Chris agreed, insisting that Umbrella wouldn't crap in their own backyard, so to speak, what with the Spencer estate disaster so recent. But Jill wasn't prepared to assume anything. Umbrella had proven that they couldn't contain their research, and with what Rebecca and David Trapp's team had found in Maine, a reference to the second novel, which I've never read myself, now was time to think about that. Now wasn't the time to think about that. They had a plane to catch. Jill scooped the flashlight off the dresser and was about to head to the living room when she remembered that she only had one bra with her. Scowling, she turned back to the open drawers and started to dig. She had enough clothing already, chosen from what Brad had left behind when he'd fled Raccoon. She and the guys had been holed up in his vacant house for several weeks, ever since Umbrella had hit Barry's house. Ever since they had hit Barry's house, and although none of Brad's stuff fit Chris's tall frame or Barry's massive one, she'd been able to make do. Lingerie, however, wasn't something that the Stars pilot had stocked up on. She didn't particularly want to hop off the plane in Austria and have to go bra shopping. "Vanity, thy name is underwear," she muttered softly, pawing through the rumpled heap. She found the elusive article only after she'd gone through the drawer twice, and crammed it into the bag as she jogged towards the small front room of the rented house. It was only the second time she'd been there since they had gone into hiding. She had the feeling that she might not be coming back for a while. There was a picture of her father on one of the bookshelves that she wanted to take. Stepping nimbly through the dark clutter, she hooded the flashlight with one hand and trained the narrow beam in the corner where the shelf had been. The Umbrella team had knocked the whole thing over, but apparently hadn't bothered to go through the books themselves. God only knew why they had been looking for in the first place. Clues as to where the renegade Stars were hiding, probably. After the attack at Barry's house and the disastrous mission in Caliban Cove, she no longer had any illusions about Umbrella simply ignoring them. Jill spotted the book she wanted and rather luridly placed it, a rather lurid-looking paperback entitled Prison Life. Her father would have laughed. She picked it up and rifled through the pages, stopping when the light fell across Dick Valentine's crooked grin. He'd sent the picture along with one of his more recent letters, and she'd tucked it into the book so that she wouldn't lose it. Hiding important things was a habit she'd gotten into young, one that that had just paid off yet again. She let the book drop and the need to hurry suddenly forgotten as she gazed down at the photo. A faint smile played across her lips. He was probably the only man she knew who looked good in the bright orange jumpsuit of a maximum security pen. For just a moment she wondered what he'd think of her current predicament. In a roundabout way, he was responsible, at least for her getting involved with the stars in the first place. After he'd been sent up, he'd urged her to get out of the business, even saying that he had been so wrong to train her as a thief. So I take a legit job, actually working for society instead of against it, and people in Raccoon start dying. The stars uncover a conspiracy to create bioweapons with a virus that turns living things into monsters. Obviously, nobody believes us. The stars can't be bought by Umbrella, or either discredited or eliminated. So we go underground, try to dig up proof, and come up empty-handed as Umbrella continues to screw around with their dangerous research, and more good people are killed. Now we're off on what will probably be a suicide mission to Europe to see if we can infiltrate a headquarters with a multi-billion-dollar corporation and stop them from destroying the goddamn planet. What would you think, I wonder? Assuming you'd even believe such a fantastic tale, what would you think? You'd be proud of me, Dad, she whispered, scarcely aware that she'd spoken aloud, and not too sure if it was the truth. Her father wanted her to see her in less perilous line of work, and compared to what she and the other ex-stars were currently up against, burglary was about as dangerous as accounting. After a long moment, she carefully placed the photo into a pocket of the backpack and looked around at the broken remnants of her small home, still thinking about her father and what he'd say about the strange path that her life had taken. If things went well, maybe she'd be able to ask him in person. Rebecca Chambers and the other surviving members of the main mission were still in hiding, quietly networking through the STARS organization for support and waiting to hear what she and Chris and Barry could tell them about Umbrella's headquarters. The official HQ was in Austria, although they'd suspected that the minds behind the T-Virus had their own secret complex elsewhere, which might be a reference. I'm not sure how much inside knowledge SD Perry had, but that might be a reference to things like, Code Veronica, or Zero, possibly, or even this book, I guess, about one here in Raccoon. So yeah, the official HQ was in Austria, though they all suspected that the minds behind the T-Virus had their own secret complex elsewhere, which you won't find out if you don't get your ass in gear. The guys are going to think you stopped to take a nap. Jill shouldered the bag and took a final look around through the kitchen. There was a lingering scent of rotten fruit in the dark air, coming from a bowl of apples and pears on the refrigerator that had long since disintegrated into mush. Even though she knew better, the smell caused a chill to run up her spine. She hurried for the closed door, trying to block out the sudden vivid flashes of memory of what they found at the Spencer estate. Rotting as they walked, reaching out with wet, withered fingers, faces melting with pus and decay. Jill? She barely contained a cry of surprise when the... Jill. She barely contained a cry of surprise when the sound of Chris's soft voice just outside. The door opened, Chris silhouetted against the darkness by a distant streetlight. Yeah, right here, she said, stepping forward. Sorry it took me so long. Umbrella's been through here with a bulldozer. Even the bare light, she could tell a half grin on his boyish face. We were starting to think the zombies got you, he said. Although his tone was light, she could hear a real concern beneath it. Jill knew that he was trying to ease tension, but couldn't find in herself to smile back. Too many people had died because of what Umbrella had unleashed in the woods outside the town. If the spill had opened closer to Raccoon... not funny, she said softly. Chris's grin faded. I know. You ready? Jill nodded, although she didn't feel particularly ready for what lay ahead. Then again, she hadn't felt ready for what they were leaving behind either. In a matter of weeks, her concept of reality had undergone a massive shift, turning nightmares into commonplace. Evil corporations, mad scientists, killer viruses, and the Walking Dead. Yeah, she said finally. I'm ready. Together they stepped outside. As Jill closed the door behind them, she was suddenly struck by a strange and ominous certainty that she would never set foot in her house again, that the three of them wouldn't be coming back to Raccoon City at all. But not because of anything that happened to us. Something will happen, but not to us. I think this was written before Nemesis became a thing, so I'm pretty sure she doesn't know that Nemesis is about to happen, and I'm pretty sure the setup that Jill was supposed to get out of the city altogether, but didn't, and just wound up in Nemesis. I can't remember how they explained that in Nemesis' novel. I'll have to read that at some point again. Frowning, hand on the doorknob, she hesitated for a moment and tried to make sense of the bizarre thought. If they survived the recon, if they were successful in their fight against Umbrella, why wouldn't they come back to their homes? She didn't know, but the feeling was uncomfortably strong. Something bad was going to happen. Something... Hey, you okay? Jill looked up at Chris and saw the same concern on his youthful face as she'd noticed earlier. They'd gotten pretty close in the last few weeks, although she suspected that Chris might like to get a bit closer. Oh, and you don't? The sense of impending unpleasantness was already fading, and the other confusions and uncertainties stepping in to take its place. Jill shook herself mentally and nodded at Chris, letting the feeling go. The flight to New York wasn't going to wait for her to indulge in self-analysis, or to worry about things that she couldn't control, imagined or otherwise. Still, that feeling... Let's get the hell out of here, she said, and she meant it. They moved out of the night, leaving the house dark behind them, as lonely and silent as the tomb. Okay, I'm going to take a brief break here for a minute. I need to actually get a glass of water and take a leak. I'll be right back. Enjoy the music. Forgot some things. Yep. And we're back. Let's see. Sorry about the delay there. So let's see some of the comments. Hey, bras are important. Yeah, bras are important. Like, that's the big thing is, like, I've written a lot of female characters, and in order to do so, I've talked with a lot of women. Bras happen to be very important. You don't want to go into a fight without one. A sports bra for a fight, for basically running from the cops. You want something supporting it, because otherwise you got these big juggly things that are slapping you in the face. I bet McNeil has a nice personality. No, I'm a complete asshole. Fat Man's Wizard Magic will bring him back, just you wait. Been a sub for a few years. Hey, Blade Charge. Guys, this isn't what I meant when I said to judge him. Wait, is Fatman here? I don't see Fatman. Oh. Okay. Chapter 2. And we're finally getting to the main characters of the novel. October 3rd, 1998. Twilight had settled across the mountains, painting the jagged horizon in shades of purple dusk. The winding blacktop snaked through the gathering darkness, surrounded by shadowed hills that towered into the cloudless sky, stretching towards the first faint glimmers of starlight. Leon might have appreciated... Oh, I also forgot to say, if anyone has this book, feel free to crack it out and read along. It'd be fun to have someone reading with me. I was out for cigarettes. No, I wouldn't do that to you guys. That's Fatman's job. Leon might have appreciated the majestic view a bit more if he wasn't so goddamn late. He'd make it to his shift on time, sure, but he is hoping to get settled into his new apartment first, take a shower, get something to eat. As it was, he might have time to hit a drive-thru on his way to the station. Changing into his uniform back at the last rest stop had saved him a couple of minutes, but basically he was screwed. Way to go, Officer Kennedy. First day on the job, and you'll be picking cheeseburger out of your teeth during roll call. Very professional. His shift started at 9, and it was already just after 8. Leon let his boot ride a little heavier on the gas, even as his Jeep whipped past a sign that told him that he was half an hour away from Raccoon City. At least the road was clear, except for a couple of semis. He hadn't seen anyone for what felt like hours. A nice change considering the traffic tie-ups just outside of New York that had cost him most of the afternoon. He'd actually tried to... So they set this pretty close to New York. That's an interesting note. I always thought Cincinnati was a good place for Raccoon City. He'd actually tried to call the night before and leave a message with the desk sergeant that he might be late, but there had been something wrong with the connections. Nothing but a busy signal. What little furniture he had was already moved into the studio apartment in the working class but basically decent Trask district of Raccoon City. There was a nice park not 2 blocks away, and it was only a 5-minute drive to the station. No more gridlock, no more overcrowded slums or random acts of brutality. Assuming he could survive the embarrassment of showing up to his first shift as a full-blown officer of law without having to unpack his bags, he was looking forward to living in the peaceful community. Raccoon is about as far removed from the Big Apple as you can get. Thank you very much. Well, except for the last few months. Those murders. In spite of himself, he felt a tiny thrill at the thought. What had happened in Raccoon was horrible, of course, sickening, but the perps had never been caught, and the investigation was really just getting started. And if Irons liked him as much as the heads of the Academy had liked him, maybe Leon would get a chance to work on the case. Word had it that Chief Irons was kind of a prick, but Leon knew his training had been top-notch. Even a prick would have to be a little impressed. He graduated top 10th after all. In the top 10th after all. And it wasn't like he was a stranger to Raccoon City, since he'd spent most of the summers there as a kid when his grandparents were still alive. Back then, the RPD building had been a library, and Umbrella was still several years away from turning the town into an actual city. But in most ways, it was still the same quiet place he'd remember from his childhood. Once the cannibal killers were finally put away, Raccoon would be ideal again. Beautiful, clean, and a white-collar community nestled in the mountains like a secret paradise. Though I guess his proximity to New York, it could work. It could work. It's about a 9-hour drive, I want to say, from New York to Ohio. So if he left in the afternoon, he'd make it by pretty late, 8. So yeah, he could feasibly be somewhere more Midwest than just Pennsylvania, which I think where they're trying to set it. So I get settled in a week or two passes, and Irons notices how well written my reports are, or see how good I am at the target range. He asked me to take a look at the case files, just to familiarize myself with the details so I can do some footwork, and I see something that no one else has seen. A pattern maybe, or a motive, or more than one of the victims. Maybe I run across a witness report that reads wrong. No one else has caught it because they've lived with it for too long. And this rookie cop just comes along and cracks the case. Not a month out of the academy, and something ran in front of the Jeep. Jesus! Leon hit the brake and swerved, shocked out of his daydream as he struggled to control the vehicle. The brakes locked and he was a screech of rubber that sounded like a scream. The Jeep half turned to face the darkening trees that lined the road, and came to a stop on the shoulder, dying after a final lurching jolt. Heart pounding and stomach in knots, Leon opened the window and craned his neck, scanning the shadows for the animal that had darted across the highway. He hadn't hit it, but it had been close. Some kind of dog, and he didn't get a clear look. A big one, anyway, a shepherd or maybe an oversized Doberman. But it had looked wrong, somehow. He'd only seen it for a split second, a flash of glowing red eyes and a lean wolfish body, and there was something else that had seemed kind of... slimy? No, trick of the light, or you were just so shit scared that you saw it wrong. You're okay, and you didn't hit it, that's the important thing. Jesus, he said again, softer this time, feeling both relieved and suddenly quite angry at the adrenaline leaking out of his system. People who let their dogs run loose were idiots, claiming they wanted their pets to be free, and then acting surprised when Fido got squashed by a car. The Jeep had come close to a stop after a few feet away from the road sign that read Raccoon City 10. He could just make out the lettering in the growing shadows. Leon glanced at his watch. He still had almost half an hour to get to the station, plenty of time, but for some reason he simply sat for a good moment, closing his eyes and breathing deeply. Cool, pine-scented air breezed across his face, the deserted stretch of road seeming almost unnaturally quiet. As if the landscape was holding its breath, waiting. Now that his heart had resumed a more normal pace, he was surprised to find that he still felt unsettled, even anxious. The murders in Raccoon. Weren't a few of those people killed by animal attacks? Wild dogs or something? Maybe that wasn't someone's pet dog after all. A disturbing thought, and even more disturbing was the sudden feeling that that the dog was still close by, maybe watching him from the darkness of the trees. Welcome to Raccoon City, Officer Kennedy. Watch out for things that may be watching you. Don't be an asshole, Leon mumbled to himself, and felt a little bit better at the sound of his own his no-nonsense adult tone of voice. He often wondered if he would ever outgrow his imagination. Daydreaming like a kid about catching bad guys and inventing killer dog monsters lurking in the woods. Let's try to act our age, eh, Leon? You're a cop, for God's sake. A grown-up. The fact that he still calls himself a grown-up is mildly amusing to me. Oh, and yeah, this is the reason I fell in love with Leon Kennedy as a character. This is like the best version of his character. And I thought the new remake was really great with it. He started the engine and backed into the road, ignoring the strange sense of unease that had somehow managed to take hold of him in spite of his mind's chiding voice. He had a new job and a nice apartment in a nice little up-and-coming city. He was competent, bright, and decent-looking. As long as he kept his creativity glands in check, everything would be fine. And I'm on my way, he said to himself, forcing a grin that felt out of place but suddenly necessary to his peace of mind. He was on his way to Raccoon City, to a promising new life. There was nothing to be uneasy about, nothing at all. Clara was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and the fact that her butt had been aching for the last couple of hours wasn't helping matters much. The thrum of her Harley's engine seemed to have settled deep into her bones, a physical counterpoint to the butterflies in her stomach, and of course, the worst of it seemed to emanate from her extremely sore and overheated ass. Plus, it was getting dark, and like an idiot, she wasn't wearing her leathers. Chris would be totally pissed. He's going to yell his head off, and I won't even care. God, Chris, please be there to scream at me for being such an idiot. The Harley buzzed along the dark road, the sound of the engine echoing back at her from the sloping hills and the shadow-laden trees. She took the corners carefully, very aware of how deserted the winding highway was. If she took a spill, it could be a long time before anyone happened by. Like it would matter. Take a spill without your gear, and they'd be scraping pieces off the asphalt with a squeegee. It was stupid, she knew. It was stupid to have left in such a god-awful hurry that she couldn't be bothered to suit up. But something had happened to Chris. Hell, something may have happened to the entire city. Over the past couple of weeks, the growing suspicion that her brother was in trouble had become certainty. And the call she made that morning had cinched it for her. Nobody home. Nobody home anywhere, like Raccoon moved and forgot to leave a forwarding address. It was definitely creepy, although she could give a shit about Raccoon. What mattered was that Chris was there, and if something bad had happened to him, she wouldn't think that way. Chris was all she had left. Their father had been killed on his construction job while they were both still kids, and when their mother had died in a car crash 3 years ago, Chris had done his best to take on the parental role. Even though he was only a few years older, he'd helped her pick a college, find a decent therapist. He'd even sent her a little money each month beyond what the insurance policy paid out, what he called walking around cash. And on top of that, he called her every month every couple of weeks like clockwork. Except he hadn't called at all in the last month and a half and hadn't returned any of her calls. She tried to convince herself that she was silly to worry. Maybe he'd finally met a girl, or something had turned up on Star's suspension thing, whatever that was about. But after 3 unanswered letters and days of waiting for the phone to ring, she'd finally put in a call to the RPD that very afternoon, hoping against hope that someone there might know what was going on. She'd gotten a busy signal. Sitting in her dorm room, listening to that soulless mechanical bleat, she started to worry for real. Even a small city like Raccoon had a voicemail answering system set up to field calls. The rational part of her mind told her, remember, this is 1990s. So not everything is super, people aren't recording messages aren't necessarily commonplace quite yet. They're there, but they're more expensive. That rational part of her mind told her not to panic, that a down line was nothing to get freaky about. But already her emotional self was screaming foul. She'd gone through her address book with trembling hands, dialing the few numbers that she had for friends of his, people or places he had told her to call if there was ever an emergency and he wasn't at home. Barry Burton, Emmy's Diner, some cop she'd never met named David Ford. She'd even tried Billy Rabbitson's number, although Chris had told her that he disappeared a few months earlier. And with the exception of an overloaded answering machine at David Ford's house, she'd gotten nothing but busy signals. By the time she'd hung up, the worry had transformed into something closer to panic. A trip to the Raccoon City was only about 6.5 hours from the university. Claire's roommate had borrowed her riding gear to go out with her new biker boyfriend, but Claire had an extra helmet, and with that feeling that was not quite panic spinning through her frightened thoughts, she had simply grabbed the helmet and gone. Stupid, maybe. Impulsive, definitely. And if Chris is okay, we can laugh about how ridiculously paranoid I am till the cows come home. But until I find out what's going on, I won't know a moment's peace. The last of the day's light was draining from the strip of cloudless sky, although waxing near a full moon, and the Softail's headlights gave her enough light to see, more than enough to see the small sign ahead on her left, Raccoon City 10. Telling herself that Chris was fine, that if anything weird had happened in Raccoon, somebody would have checked it out by now, Claire forced her concentration back to handling the heavy bike. It would be full dark, but she'd be in Raccoon before it was too dark to ride safely. Whether or not Raccoon would be safe, she'd soon find out. Or she'd soon enough find out. She'd find out soon enough. God, can you tell that I think I might be mildly dyslexic? Get the water out. Chapter 3. Captain Trucks, even though... Wrong Ford! Although now you mention it, that's probably why he's named in the games. Because Japanese people needed to pull from actual American names. Leon reached the outskirts of the town with 20 minutes to spare, but decided that a hot dinner was going to have to wait. From his previous visits to the station, he knew that there were a couple of vending machines he could hit up for something to tide him over. The thought of stale candy with peanuts didn't sit well on his growing stomach, but it was his own downfall for not taking New York traffic into account. The drive into the city proper did a lot to soothe his still rattled nerves. He passed the few small farms that lay east of town, the fairgrounds and storage sheds, and finally the truck stop that marked the separation of rural Raccoon from urban. Something about knowing that he was going to be patrolling those back roads before long, keeping them safe, gave him a surprising sense of well-being and not a little pride. The early autumn air from the open window was pleasantly brisk. and the rising moon bathed everything he saw in a silver glow. He wasn't going to be late after all. Within the hour, he'd officially become one of Raccoon's finest. An actual raccoon. No, I'm kidding. As Leon turned to the jeep down Bybee, heading for one of the main north-south streets that would take him to the RPD building, he got his first hint that something was very wrong. In the first few blocks, he was mildly surprised. By the fifth, he found himself slipping towards a state of shock. It wasn't just strange, it was impossible. Bybee was the first real city street coming from the east where the buildings outnumbered empty lots. There were several espresso bars and cheap diners, as well as a bargain movie theater that never seemed to run anything but horror movies and sexy comedies, and was therefore the most popular hangout for the youth of Raccoon. There were even a few generically hip taverns that served microbrew and hot rum drinks for the winter college student ski crowd. A quarter to 9 on a Saturday night, Bybee should have been teeming with life. But of the mostly single two-story brick shops and restaurants that lined the streets, Leon saw that almost all were dark, and in the few that still boasted some light, it didn't look like there was anyone inside. There were plenty of cars parked along the narrow streets, and yet not one person that he could see. Bybee, the hangout for cruising teens and college students, was totally deserted. Where the hell is everybody? His mind grasped for an answer as he crept down the silent street, searching desperately for a reason, and for some way to alleviate the sweating anxiety that had once again settled over him. Maybe there was some kind of an event going on, a church function, like a spaghetti feed, or perhaps Raccoon had decided to take up Oktoberfest tonight, and tonight was the big kickoff. Yeah, but everybody at the same time? It'd have to be one hell of a party. It was then that Leon realized he also hadn't seen a single car on the road since he had had the scare with the dog 10 miles out of town. Not one. And with the thorough, unsettled realization came the next, less dramatic but distinctly more immediate. Something smelled bad. In fact, something smelled like shit. Geez, dead skunk. And apparently it threw up on itself before dying. He'd already slowed down the jeep to a crawl and had planned to take a left on Powell just a block ahead, but that horrible smell and the total absence of life were giving him a serious case of the creeps. Maybe he should stop and check things out, look around for some sign of... Oh, hey. Leon grinned, relief flooding through his confusion as there were a couple of people standing at the corner practically right in front of him. The street light was out on their side, but he could see them in silhouette clear enough. A couple, a woman in a skirt and a big man wearing workout boots. As he got closer, he could see by the way they moved, heading south on Powell, that they had to be monumentally drunk. Both of them staggered into the shadows cast by an office supply store and out of sight, but he was going in that direction anyways. No harm in stopping to ask what was going on, was there? Must have come out of O'Kelly's. A pint or two too many, but as long as they're not driving anywhere, fine by me. Am I going to feel stupid when they tell me that tonight's the big free concert? No. Or the all-you-can-eat town barbecue? Almost giddy with relief, Leon turned the corner and squinted into the heavy shadows, looking for the pair. He didn't see them, but there was an alley tucked away between some supply stores and a jewelry shop. Maybe his two drunk friends had ducked into the bathroom for a bathroom break or something even less legal. Shit! Leon slammed on the brake as a half-dozen dark shapes fluttered from the street, caught in the Jeep's headlight as a giant whirling leaves. Startled, it took him a second to realize what he was seeing. Birds. They didn't cry out, although he was close enough to hear the brushing of their dry wings as they took off to the air. Crows, enjoying a late-night feast of roadkill, what looked like... Oh my god! There was a human body in the middle of the road, 20 feet in front of the Jeep. Face down, but it looked like a woman, and judging from the liquid red stains that covered most of her once white blouse, it wasn't some beer-happy college student who decided to take a nap in the wrong place. Night, Romulus. You guys, if you think that anyone else would be interested in this, spread it around. I'd be happy to have more of a crowd. You guys aren't lovely. You guys are absolutely wonderful. Hit and run. Some bastard hit her and then drove away. Jesus, what a mess. Leon killed the engine and was half out the door before his racing thoughts caught up to him. He hesitated 1 foot on the asphalt, the stench of death heavy in the cool air, still air. His mind had latched onto an idea that he didn't want to consider, but he knew that he had better. This wasn't some training exercise. This was his life. What if it's not a hit and run? What if there's no one around because some psycho gunman decided on a little target practice? Everyone could be inside, laying low. Maybe the RPD's on the way, and maybe those drunks weren't drunks. They could have been shot and were trying to get help. He leaned back into his Jeep and fumbled under the passenger seat for his graduation gift, a Desert Eagle 50 AE Magnum with custom 10-inch barrel, Israeli export. His father and uncle, both cops, had gone in together on it. Not a standard issue for the RPD, in fact much more powerful. As Leon grabbed the clip from the glove box and slammed it in, "It's a magazine, Perry, it's a magazine!" Sorry, gun nut a little bit. Nah, I love you, Thomas. You just messaged me on Steam in the middle of streams, which is kind of rude. But yeah, I can forgive. I can doesn't mean I do. No, I forgive you. Not standard issue for the RPD. Blah 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 blah. As Leon grabbed a clip from the glove box and slapped it in, feeling the solid weight of the weapon in his slightly unsteady hands, he decided it was the best present he had ever received. He stuffed 2 more clips into the belt pouch on a general principle. Each only held about 6 rounds. Pointing the loaded magnum at the ground, he stepped out of the Jeep and took a quick look at his surroundings. He wasn't all that familiar with Raccoon at night, but he knew that it shouldn't be as dark as it was. Several of the streetlights farther along Powell were either shot out or simply not on, and the shadows past the blood-soaked body were thick. If not for the Jeep's headlights, he wouldn't have even been able to see that. He edged forward, feeling horribly exposed as he left the relative cover of the Jeep, but aware as she could still be alive. It didn't seem likely, but he had to at least check. At a few steps closer, and he could see that it was definitely a young woman. Lank red hair obscured the face, but the clothes were right, denim pedal pushers and flats. The wounds were mostly hidden by the bloody shirt, but there seemed to be a dozen ragged holes in the wet cloth, exposed, torn, glistening flesh, and the crimson of muscle behind. Swallowing heavily, Leon quickly switched the gun to his left hand and crouched down next to her. The cool, clammy skin yielded easily beneath his fingertips as he touched her throat, pressing his first 2 fingers against the carotid. The carotid. I don't know how to pronounce that. A few seconds passed, seconds that made him feel horribly young and afraid as he tried to remember procedure for CPR and prayed at the same time that he would feel a pulse. 5 compressions, 2 short breaths, keep my elbows locked, come on, please, don't be dead. He couldn't find it, and didn't want to wait for 1 more second. He tucked the magnum into his belt and grabbed her shoulders to turn her over to check for breathing, but as he started to lift, he saw something that made him lay her down again, his heart twisting, a twisting knot in his chest. The victim's shirt had pulled out of her pants enough for him to see that her spine and part of her rib cage were exposed. The still fleshy knobs of vertebrae shining and red, the narrow curve of ribs disappearing into the masses of shredded tissue. It was like she'd been knocked down and chewed on. Information that Leon had disregarded as unimportant suddenly registered, and even as the few facts he had clicked into place, he felt the first inky tendrils of real fear slither into his mind. The crows couldn't have done this. It would have taken them hours, and who the hell would have heard crows flocking after dark to eat? And that shit smell? It's not coming from her. She died recently, and... Cannibal murderers. No. No way. For that to happen, for a person to have killed and then partially devoured on a city street, and no one to stop it, and with enough time to pass for scavengers to come and for that to happen, the killer would have to slaughter most, if not all, the population. Doesn't seem likely. Fine, then what's that smell, and where is everyone? Behind Leon there was a low, soft groan, a shuffling footstep, and another sound. A wet sound. It took him barely a second to stand and turn, hand instinctively snatching for the magnum. It was the couple, the drunkards, staggering towards him, and they'd been joined by a third, a beefy-looking guy with blood all over his shirt. And his hands and dripping out of his mouth, a rubbery red mound set into his pasty, rotting face like an open sword. The other man, the big man with work boots and suspenders, looked much the same, and the V of the blonde woman's pink blouse revealed cleavage that spotted with darkness, with what appeared to be mold. The trio stumbled towards him, past his jeep, raising pale hands as they emitted moaning, hungry wails. Some dark fluid gargled out of the beefy man's nose and ran across his moving lips. And Leon was overwhelmed by the understanding that this terrible, shitty smell was decayed flesh, and it was coming from them. And there was another one, stepping out from a door across the street, a young woman in a stained t-shirt, hair tied back from a slack and mindless face. I think the descriptions in this book are better than the visuals in the original games. Newer games come close, but this is like newer games are great because they're like the visuals that I saw while reading this. A groan rose from behind him. Leon shot a look over his shoulder and saw a youth with dark hair and rotting arms shamble out from the sidewalk darkness of an awning shadow. Leon raised his magnum and aimed at the closest man with the suspenders. While his instincts screamed for him to run, he was terrified, but his trained logic continued to insist that there was an explanation for what he was seeing, that he was not looking at the Walking Dead. Control. Procedure. You're a cop. All right, that's far enough. Don't move. His voice was strong, commanding, and authoritative, and he was wearing his uniform, and God, why wouldn't they stop? The man in suspenders moaned again, blind to the weapon pointing at his chest, and still flanked by the others, now less than 10 feet away. Don't move! Leon said again. The sound of his own panic made him back away up a step, darting his gaze left and right, seeing that there were still more of the wailing, lurching people coming out of the shadows. Something grabbed his ankle. No! He shouted, whipping his gun around, and saw that the corpse of the hit-and-run victim was scrambling at his boot with one blood-crusted hand, working to drag her crippled body closer. Her grasping cry of frantic hunger rose to join the others as she tried to bite onto his foot, bloody smears of saliva drooling off her abraded chin, dripping onto the leather. Yeah. The books, they're fun reads. I think they're like kind of pulpy, but I mean, this is the kind of shit that I just eat up. Get it? It's because zombies. Where was I? Dripping onto the leather. Leon fired into her upper back, the sharp explosive crack of the massive weapon loosening her grip, and as such close range, probably obliterating her heart. Spasming, she dropped back to the pavement, and he turned and saw that the others were less than 5 feet away. He fired twice more, the round splattering red flowers into their chest of the closest. The entry wound sprouted scarlet. The man in suspenders was hardly fazed by the twin gaping holes in his torso. And that's a 50 caliber bullet. That's holy. Yeah. The books are not canon. They're no longer canon. They used to be somewhat canon, but especially with the new remake, they are not canon anymore. This is radically different than what happens in the although the big plot beats are the same typically. They're just some events are kind of switched around and changed a little bit in current canon. The man in suspenders was hardly fazed by the twin gaping holes in his torso, his stagger faltering for only a second. He opened his bloody mouth and gaped out a hissing yell of hunger, hands raised again as if to direct him to a source of relief. Must be on something. Firepower like that could drop an elephant. Backing away, Leon fired again, and again, and again. And then the empty clattered to the pavement. Another slammed in, more rounds fired, and still they kept coming, oblivious to the shots that rippled at their stinking flesh. It was a bad dream. A bad movie. It wasn't real, and Leon knew that if he didn't start believing, he was going to die, eaten alive by these. Go ahead, Kennedy, say it. These zombies. Blocked from his jeep, Leon stumbled away, still firing. I'm gonna blow my nose, because I need to. How are you all enjoying it so far? Am I clear enough to hear? Do I sound quality for you? Chapter 4. So much for the nightlife. So much for the nightlife. This place is Deadsville. Claire had seen a couple of people wandering around as she pulled into the Raccoon, though not nearly as many as there should have been. In fact, the place seemed to be spectacularly deserted. The helmet blocked out a lot of visual evidence, but there was definitely a lack of business going on at the east end of town. A lack of traffic as well. It struck her as weird, but considering the disaster she'd been imagining all afternoon, not all that ominous. Raccoon still existed, at least, and she had headed for the 24-hour diner off Powell. And as she headed for the 24-hour diner off Powell, she saw a fairly large group of partiers walking down the middle of the street. Drunken frat boys, if she'd remembered her last visit clearly. Obnoxious, but hardly the horsemen of the apocalypse. I'm inexplicably dubbed in Turkish. Okay. Is that a reference to Turkish Star Wars? No bombed out ruins, no dying fires, no air raid sirens. So far, so good. She planned out to head straight for Chris's apartment before she realized that she'd be passing Emmy's on the way. Chris couldn't cook worth a damn. Consequently, he lived on cereal, cold sandwiches, and dinner at Emmy's about 6 nights a week. Even if he wasn't there, it might be worth it to stop in and ask one of the waitresses if they'd seen him lately. As Claire pulled the soft tail to a gentle stop in front of Emmy's, she noticed a couple of rats scurrying for cover atop the garbage can on the sidewalk. She pulled down the stand and unstraddled the bike, taking off her helmet and settling it on the warm seat. Shaking out her ponytail, she wrinkled her nose in disgust. From the smell of things, the trash had been sitting out for quite a while. Whatever they were throwing away was giving off a seriously toxic stink. Before going in, she chafed her bare legs and arms slightly, as much to warm them as to wipe off the top layer of road grime. Shorts and a vest were no match for the October night, and it reminded her once again of how dumb she had been to ride Bear. Chris would give her one hell of a lecture. But he's not here. The building's glass front gave her a clear look into the well-lit, homey restaurant, from the blotted red stools at the lunch counter to the padded booths lining the wall, and there wasn't a sound in sight. Claire frowned, her initial disappointment giving way to confusion. Having visited Chris pretty regularly over the past few years, she'd been to the diner at all hours of the day and night. They were both night owls, often deciding to go out for cheeseburgers at 3 a.m. in the morning. At 3 in the morning. She didn't put the a.m. in there. I did because I'm stupid. Which meant Emmy's every time. And there was always someone at Emmy's, chatting with one of the pink polyester-clad waitresses or the hunched-over cup of coffee with the newspaper, no matter what time it was. So where are they? It's not even 9 o'clock. The sign said open, and she wasn't going to find out standing in the street. With a last glance at her bike, she opened the door and stepped inside. Taking a deep breath, she called out hopefully. "Hello? Is anyone there? Here. Anyone here?" Her voice seemed somehow flat in the muted silence of the empty restaurant. Except for the soft hum of the ceiling fans overhead, there wasn't a sound. There was a familiar smell of stale grease in the air, but something else too. A scent that was bitter yet soft, like rotting flowers. The restaurant was L-shaped, booths stretching off in front of her and to the left. Walking slowly, Claire headed straight. At the end of the lunch counter was a wait station, and past that was the kitchen. If Emmy's was open, the staff would probably be hanging out there, maybe as surprised that, as she was that there were no customers. Except that wouldn't explain the mess, now would it? It wasn't a mess, exactly. The disorder was subtle enough that she hadn't noticed it from the outside. A few menus on the floor, an overturned water glass on the counter, a couple of randomly strewn pieces of silverware were the only signs of something amiss, but they were enough. Scoot my chair a little bit so I can lean back a little more comfortably. Wish I could lock my chair in place. It's rolly. To hell with checking out the kitchen. This is too weird. Something is seriously fucked up in this city. Or maybe they got robbed, or maybe they're setting up for a surprise party. Who cares? Time for you to be elsewhere. From the hidden space at the end of the counter, she heard a gentle sound of movement, a sliding, whispering of cloth followed by a muffled grunt. Somebody was there, ducked down. Heart thumping loudly, Claire called out again. Hello? For a beat there was nothing, and then another grunt, a muted moan that raised the hair on the back of her neck. In spite of her misgivings, Claire hurried towards the back, suddenly feeling childish for her desire to leave. Maybe there had been a robbery. Maybe the customers had been tied up and gagged, or maybe worse, so badly injured they couldn't cry out. Like it or not, she was involved. Claire reached the end of the counter, pivoted left, and froze. Eyes wide, feeling as though she had been physically slapped. Next to a cart loaded with trays was a balding man dressed in a cook's whites, his back to her. He was crouched over the body of a waitress, but there was something very wrong about her, so wrong that Claire's mind couldn't quite accept it at first. Her shocked gaze took in the pink uniform of the walking shoes, even the plastic name tag still pinned to the woman's chest that looked like Julie or Julia. Her head. Her head is missing. Once Claire realized what was wrong, she couldn't force herself to unrealize it, as much as she wanted to. There was only a pool of drying blood where the waitress's head should have been, a sticky puddle surrounded by fragments of skull and dark mashed hair and chunks of miscellaneous gore. The cook had his hands over his face, and as Claire stared in horror at the headless corpse, he let out a low, pitiful wail. Claire opened her mouth, not sure what would come out. To scream, to ask him why, how, to offer to call for help. She honestly didn't know, and as the man turned to look up at her, hands dropping away, she was stunned to hear that nothing came out at all. He was eating the waitress. His thick fingers were clotted with dark bits of tissue. The strange and alien face he raised into view was smeared with blood. Zombie. A child of late-night creature features and campfire stories, her mind accepted it in a split second it took for her to think of it. She wasn't an idiot. And that's what I love about Claire. She's like, oh yeah, no, that's a zombie. I'm not beating around the bush. That's a zombie. He was deathly pale and ripe with that sickly sweet scent of decay she'd noticed earlier. His eyes cataracts and gleaming white. Zombies and raccoon. I never expected that. With that calm, logical realization came a sudden rush of absolute terror. Claire stumbled backwards, feverish panic turning her guts into liquid as the cook continued to turn, rising from his crouch. He was huge, easily a foot over her 5'3" and broad as a barn. And dead. He's dead, and he was eating her. Don't let him get any closer. The cook took a step forward, his stained hands clenching into fists. Claire backed up faster, almost slipping on a menu. A fork clattered away from beneath one boot. Get out now! I'll be on my way now, she babbled. Really, don't bother to show me out. The cook staggered forward, his blind eyes glowing with dumb hunger. Another step back, and Claire reached behind her, felt air, felt nothing, and then felt the cool metal of the door's handle. A shot of adrenaline triumph bolted through her as she spun, snatched at the handle, and screamed a short, sharp cry of horror. There were three more of them outside, their disintegrating flesh pressed to the glass of the glass front of the diner. One of them had only one eye, a separating hole where the other should have been. Another had no upper lip, a ragged permanent grin scrawled across its lower jaw. They crawled mindlessly at the windows, their ashy, ravaged faces swathed with blood, and from the shadow across the street, dark shapes shambled out in the open. Can't get out. Trapped. Jesus, the back door! From the edge of her vision, the glowing green exit sign shone like a beacon. Claire spun and barely saw the cook reaching out to her from a few feet away. Her full attention fixated on the only hope of escape. She ran, booths whipping by in a flash of unseen color, her arms pumping for speed. The door opened out in an alley, and she was going to hit it running. And if it was locked, she was screwed. Claire slammed into the door and flew open, crashing into the brick wall of the alley. and there was a gun pointed at her face, the only thing that could possibly have stopped her at that second, a man with a gun. She froze, raising her arms instinctively as if to ward off a blow. "Wait! Don't shoot!" The gunman didn't move, the deadly-looking weapon still aimed on her head. "Gonna kill me." "Get down!" The gunman shouted, and Claire dropped to her knees, buckling as much from the command as the cold fingertips suddenly groping at her shoulders. Boom! Boom! The gunman fired, and Claire snapped her head around and saw the dead cook falling backwards from directly behind her. At least one massive hole now in his forehead. Sluggish spurts of blood jetted from the wound, white eyes filming over with red. The fallen corpse twitched once, twice, and stopped moving. Claire turned back to the man who saved her life, and his uniform registered for the first time. Cop. He was young, tall, and almost as terrified looking as she felt. His upper lip beaded with sweat, his blue eyes wide and unblinking. His voice, at least, was strong, and sure as he reached down to help her up. We can't stay out here. Come with me. We'll be a lot safer at the police station. As he spoke, she could hear a closing chorus of gaping moans from the street, the wails of hunger growing louder. Claire let herself be pulled up, gripping his hand tightly, taking a small comfort in the fact that his fingers were as feverish and as shaky as hers. They ran, dodging dumpsters and heaps of flattened boxes, chased by echoes, haunting cries as the zombies found the dark alley and started after them. Everyone's having a good time, I hope, huh? How many people have we got on stream? Let's see. We have 13 people watching. Well, that is disappointing. We need more. We need to bump those numbers. I want more people to read this with. It's a great, great story. Let's see. How long is chapter 5? What time is it? 7:12? I've only been going an hour, but my voice is really fucking tired. 6. Might get through chapter 7 by the looks of it by the end of this. Yeah, I could totally get through chapter 7 by the end of this. How many RD books are there? There are 7, as I understand it. 5 of which are based on the core games. We've got Resident Evil 0, 1, 2, 3, and Code Veronica represented. And then after that, there are books in between that are made by S.D. Perry herself. I believe they are... The Caliban Cove is the second one. Is the first original book, but the second chronologically. And there's one more that involves a zombie T-Rex, of all things. That was before Resident Evil 6 was ever even imagined. So, I mean, it's ahead of its time. Okay. Got to get some air in me. I'm feeling a little lightheaded. Yeah, I gotta understand that. That makes sense. But I do have scroll back capability, so they could watch it back there. And just saying. Leon ran alongside the girl, desperately racking his memory for the city's downtown layout. I think that's the wrong use of racking. I tell you, S.D. Perry, I think I found a typo. I think it's racking with a W is supposed to be the term. Not racking with an R. The alley should lead out to Ash, not far from Oak, the RPD's street. But the station was at least another 15 blocks west. Unless they could find transportation, they weren't going to make it. He was on his last clip, 4 rounds left, and from the sounds of reverberating through the alley, there were dozens, maybe hundreds of the creatures at either end. As they reached the mouth of the alley, Leon held up his hands and slowed to a jog, scanning the dimly lit street. He couldn't see much, but from where they stood, the next streetlight, there were 11 or 12 of the creatures to the right, staggering and reeling their way through the stinking darkness. There were only 3 of them to the left, not far from... Hallelujah! There! Leon pointed at the squad car parked across the street, feeling a flush of wild hope. There were no officers in sight. That was too much to ask for. but the front doors were standing open, and 3 moaning things that roamed around nearby wouldn't reach it before he and the girl could. Even if there were no keys, there was a radio and the windshield was bulletproof. They could probably hold out against the walking corpses until help came. And it's the only chance you've got. Go! He hesitated just long enough to see the girl nod, her brown ponytail bobbing, and then they were sprinting for the black and white, the pavement a blur beneath their feet. Leon kept the handgun half pointed towards the creatures, closest to them, the creatures so closest to them, 50 feet away. He wanted to shoot, to keep them from getting one step closer, but he couldn't afford to waste ammo. God, let there be keys. They reached the car at the same time, and split, the girl running around to the passenger side and Leon realizing with a new kind of horror that she probably thought the car was his. He waited for her to slam the door before jumping behind the wheel, a small, deeply frightened part of him screaming that this was his first day as he yanked his own door shut. A prayer answered, the keys were in the ignition. Leon dropped the Magnum onto his lap, grabbed them, feeling a wild hope once again, like there were options besides dying. "Buckle up," he said, barely hearing her assessment as he turned the keys, and the flashers came on. Ash Street and the creatures that stalked it were bathed in blue and red swirls of pallid color, shadows changing form and thickness. It was a vision from hell, and he hit the gas, desperate to get away from it as fast as he could. The car spun from the curb with a squeal. Leon pulled the wheel right and then left, narrowly missing a lurching woman whose scalp had been torn half off. Even through the closed windows, he could hear the frustrated howls as they sped away, joined by the cries of many more. Backup. Call for backup. Leon fumbled for the radio, not taking his gaze off the road. The creatures were scattered but persistent, dark and shambling monsters that staggered out onto the streets as if drawn by the sound of the speeding car. As the black and white rocketed across Powell and continued on, he had to dodge several more of them. The girl was talking, staring out the desolate landscape as Leon hit the comm button on the radio, his sense of helplessness rising. No static, no nothing. What the hell is going on? I arrive in Raccoon and the whole place is going insane. Oh, that's Claire. What the hell is going on? I arrive in Raccoon and the whole place is going insane. Great. Radio's out, Leon interrupted, dropping the radio and focusing on the road. The entire city seemed like an alien world, the streets strangely shadowed. There was a dreamlike quality to it, but the smell kept him from believing that he was asleep. The stench of the diseased flesh had permeated even the interior of the squad car, making it hard to concentrate on driving. At least there was no traffic and no people. No real people. Except me and the girl. I've got to do my job here and keep her from getting hurt. Poor kid, she can't be older than 19 or 20. She's probably terrified. I've got to keep it together and shield her from further danger here. Get to the station and... You're a cop, right? The girl's lilting but somehow sarcastic tone snapped him back out of his panicked musings. He shot a look in her direction, noting that while she looked pale, she didn't seem to be quivering on the edge of breaking down. There was even a trace of humor in her clear gray eyes, and Leon got a sudden strong impression that this wasn't a breakdown type. A very good thing considering the circumstances. Yeah, first day on the job. Great, huh? I'm Leon Kennedy, and for the record, this was the line that I was so sad to see cut from the remake. I love this line. It's perfect for Leon. The idea, he's just sort of like, yeah, we're fucked. Claire, she said. Claire Redfield. I came here to find my brother Chris. She trailed off, staring back at the passenger seat. Staring out at the passing street. At the passenger seat. Two of the creatures were staggering into the path of the car from either side, but Leon hit the gas and had managed to drive between them. The steel mesh screen separating the back compartment was down, leaving a clear look from the rearview mirror. The two shuffling ghouls were now plodding mindlessly after them. Hungry, just like in the movies. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the obvious question remaining unspoken. Whatever had happened to turn Raccoon into a horror show didn't matter as much as how they were going to survive it. They'd be at the station in a couple of minutes, assuming the road stayed clear. There was an underground parking lot that he had tried that first, but the gates were closed. They'd have to cover a short distance on foot. There was a small courtyard in front of the building, a park area, 4 rounds left and maybe a city full of those things. We need another weapon. Hey, open the glove box, he said, and if it was locked, there was a key on the ring that should open it. Claire tapped the button and reached inside, revealing that the back of her pink sleeveless vest, the legend Made in Heaven, was appliqued above a voluptuous posing angel holding a bomb. The outfit suited her. There's a gun inside, she said, and pulled out a sleek semi-automatic. She raised it carefully and checked to see if it was loaded before digging out a couple of clips. Magazines. It was one of the RPD's old issues, a 9mm Browning HP. Since a slew of recent murders, the Raccoon Police Force had been carrying Heckler & Koch VP-70s, another 9mm. The difference was that the Browning could only hold 13, while the newer issues held 18 rounds, 19 if you kept one chambered. From the way she handled it, Leon could tell that she knew what she was doing. Better take it with you, he said. The RPD kept a decent arsenal. Assuming that there were still cops around, he could pick up his assigned weapon. And why are you assuming anything? As Leon looked at the corner of Ash and 3rd a little too quickly, he realized the realization finally hit him that the station itself might be crawling with corpses. Everything was happening so fast, he just hadn't considered the possibility. He straightened out the car and let up on the gas, trying to come up with an alternate plan as calmly and rationally as he could. Maybe there was an organized defense at the station, but it wasn't easy to feel hopeful with the stink of decay so heavy in the air. We have three quarters of a tank, more than enough to make it over the mountains. We could be in Latham in less than an hour. They could drive by the station, and if it looked unfriendly, he'd just get the hell out of town. It sounded good to him. He started to tell Claire, see what she thought, when the horrible smell of slaughter washed over him and something lunged out of the back seat. Claire screamed, and the monster that had been in the squad car all along grasped Leon's shoulder with its icy hands, its fly-blown breath gusting into his face. It snatched at his right arm, pulling it towards his drool-slicked teeth with inhuman strength. No! Leon shouted as the car veered wildly to the right, jumping the curb and sliding towards a brick building. The creature was unbalanced, losing some of its grip. Leon jerked the wheel, but too late to avoid the wall completely. Metal shrieked, and a brilliant flash of sparks illuminated the groping hands as the leering, ghoulish grin of their passenger. Metal shrieked, and brilliant flash of sparks illuminated the groping hands and leering, ghoulish grin of their passenger as the speeding car shot. Oh, thank you, Oi-san? Oi-san, for the subscription. Thank you for subscribing. You're probably not watching this video right now, but you know what? Thank you anyway. As their passenger, as the speeding car shot back out onto the street. The dead thing swung its eager arms at Claire, and without thinking, Leon slammed on the gas and pulled hard right. The car fishtailed and back end crunching against a parked pickup truck in another burst of fiery sparks. The drooling corpse fell back onto the padded seat, but immediately pulled itself forward again, gnashing its teeth and clawing for the girl. The squad car sped down third, Leon trying to control the wheel as he grabbed his weapon and half-turned, holding the Magnum by the barrel. He didn't think to take his foot off the gas, couldn't think of anything except the zombie was about to sink its teeth into Claire's struggling shoulder. He brought the heavy weapon down across its face, the butt sliding across the flesh that peeled away in a thick flap. Blood gushing from the wound as the grips crushed into the nose, cartilage separating from the bone with a wet crunch. Gurgling, the creature clutched at its bleeding head, and Leon just had enough time to feel a second triumph when Claire screamed, "Look out!" And Leon looked up to see that they were about to crash. Leon hit the zombie with his gun, and Claire instinctively flinched from the splatter of blood, her horrified gaze finding the street they were on about to end. Look out! Well, she said the same thing. She caught just a glimpse of the white knuckles on the wheel, his clenched jaw, and the car was spinning, screeching buildings and streetlights flashing by so fast that they saw that all she saw was a blur, and then, BAM! There was an explosion of sound, of glass shattering and metal compressing as the car slammed into something solid, throwing Claire against her safety belt. The impact hurled the zombie forward at the same time, and Claire reflexively threw her arms up as the dead thing crashed through the windshield. And then everything was still. There was only the ticking of hot metal and the sound of her own heart thundering in her ears. Claire brought her arms down and saw that Leon had already recovered. He was already staring at the bloody, broken mess sprawled across the hood, its head hanging mercifully out of sight. It wasn't moving. What are we talking about, Organization 13? Okay. You okay? Claire turned to look at Leon. You okay? Claire turned to look at Leon, suddenly having to fight off a semi-hysterical laughing fit. Raccoon had just been taken over by the living dead, and they'd just been in a serious car wreck because of a corpse had been trying to eat them. All things considered, okay was not the first word to come to mind. At the sight of Leon's sincere and stricken expression, the urge to freak out passed. He looked on the edge of a fit himself, allowing her devastated nerves to free rein wouldn't help any. Still in one piece, she managed, and the young cop nodded, smiling relieved. Still in one piece, Claire took a deep breath, feeling like it was the first time she'd taken one in hours, and looked at where they had ended up. Leon had managed to complete 180 at the end of the street where it teed, and obviously totaled the squad car facing back the way they'd come. There were no zombies in the immediate vicinity, but Claire had the feeling that they wouldn't have long to find cover from what she'd seen so far. Most if not all Raccoon had been affected by whatever had happened. She held the handgun tightly, trying to get her tangled emotions under control. Leon started to say something, and then stopped, his eyes widening as he stared at the rear-view mirror. Claire looked behind her, and for a second could only think that at some point since she left the university, she'd been cursed. Cursed. Somebody wants me dead, that's all there is to it. A semi was barreling down the street, still several blocks away, but close enough for them to see that it was out of control. The truck veered back and forth, smashing against a blue pickup parked on one side of the street, and then plowing under a mailbox on the other. Claire realized with numb horror that it was a tanker, and from the way the hull was sliding dangerously at each frantic swerve, the driver had a full load. In the split second that it took to digest that information, to pray that it wasn't gas or oil, the tanker had halved the distance between them. She could actually see the flames painted across the dark green cab. But even then, it wasn't real until Leon broke her stunned silence. "Maniac's gonna ram us!" he breathed, and then they were both stabbing at the seatbelts releases. Claire praying that they clashed. You can tell I'm losing my voice here. Claire praying that the crash hadn't locked them both in somehow. The sound of the belts letting go were inaudible beneath the rising monolithic growl of the oncoming tanker, and the echoing crunch of the cars being sideswiped left and right. It would be on them in a heartbeat. "Run!" Leon shouted, and they were both pushing. And she was pushing her way out of the squad car, cool air against her sweaty skin, and the scream of the truck's engine blocking out everything else. She took 3 gigantic running leaps, and then felt as much as heard the impact, the asphalt shaking beneath her feet as the crash of the rending metal thundered behind her. One more flying step, and kaboom! She was being pushed, shoved roughly off her feet by an incredible pressure wave of heat and sound. She managed to kick off against the ground as the tanker explosion turned the night into day in one brilliant instant. An awkward shoulder roll, grit biting into her heat-blasted skin, and she landed behind a parked car in a gasping heap. There was a brief clattering rain of smoking debris, and Claire was on her feet, stumbling back into the street to search for the towering flames from some sign of Leon. Her heart sank. The tanker, the squad car, and what had once been a hardware store were all enveloped in an inferno of chemical fire. the street completely blocked by the mass of twisted, burning destruction. Claire! Leon's voice muffled but audible through the wall of curling flame. Leon? I'm okay, he shouted. Head to the station. I'll meet you there. Claire hesitated for a second, staring down at the handgun that she still held tightly in one hand. She was afraid, scared of being alone in the city that had turned into a living graveyard. But it wasn't like there was much of a choice. Wishing that circumstances were different was a waste of time. Okay! She turned, trying to get her bearings by the smoking, flickering light of the wreck. The station was close, a couple of blocks away, and there were creatures, there were creatures lurching out from the shadows behind the cars and inside darkened buildings. With single-minded purpose, they shambled onto the strange light of the blazing accident, making small rounds of growls of hunger as they came. Four of them. She saw tattered skin and rotting limbs, gaping blackness where eyes should be, and still they came, moving slowly towards her as if homing in on living flesh. Beyond this fiery wreck, she heard gunfire. 2 shots from perhaps a block away, then nothing. Nothing but the crackle of consuming flame and the soft, helpless cries of the shuffling dead. Leon's on his own now. Move! Claire took a deep breath, spotted an opening with a lethal crowd closing on her, and ran. Okay, I'm going to take a restroom break, refill my drink, and I'll be right back, and we'll do 2 more chapters. Does that sound good to everyone? Okay, be right back. And I'm back. We're on chapter 6 for the record. I'm hoping to get through chapter 7 by the end of this. See what my hair does that. Oh, we're starting with a new character here. Chapter 6. Ada felt wrong fit in the Ada Wong fit the shimmering... Wow, I read that horribly. I might pass out. No. Ada Wong fit the shimmering disc of metal into the slot of the statue, patting it onto the opening until it was flush with the marble. As soon as it was in place, she heard a shift of hidden levers and stepped back to see what had happened. Her footfalls echoed across the massive lobby of the RPD building, the sounds reverberating back to her from the 3 stories of open room. Another key? One of the sub-basement metals? Or perhaps another key? One of the sub-basement metals? Or perhaps the sample itself, hidden in plain sight. Wouldn't that be a happy surprise? If wishes were horses. The water-bearing nymph made of stone slid forward at a slight angle, and the picture of her shoulders dropping a slender piece of metal atop the tip of the defunct fountain. The spade key. She sighed, picking it up. She already had the keys. In fact, she had everything she needed to search the station, and most of what she needed to get to the lab. If it wasn't for someone at Umbrella dropping the bomb, the job would have been a walk. Easy money. Instead, I get 3 days vacation sans comfort. I get Night of the Living standoff. I get to play Put the Bullet in the Brain, Let's Find the Reporter, and find the reporter at the same time. The samples could be anywhere by now, depending on who survived, assuming I make it out of here with the goods. I'm asking for a big goddamn bonus. No one should have to work in these conditions. Interesting fact, I think the newer version of the game actually wanted to go with a less experienced Ada than we see in the original game and in here. And I actually kind of like that. It makes her a very nice parallel to Leon. Ada slipped the key into her hip pack, then gazed unseething at the upper balustrade of the impressive hall, mentally checking off rooms that she had been through and ones she'd searched more thoroughly. Bertolucci didn't seem to be anywhere on the east side of the building, upstairs or down. She spent what felt like hours staring into the dead faces, searching for the reeking piles of corpses for his square jaw and anachronistic ponytail. Of course, he could be moving, but from the information she had on him, it was improbable. The reporter was very much a rabbit, a hider in the face of danger. Oh, Luke, you don't... Blade Charge, do you know who Ada Wong is? Oh, Lord. Speaking of danger, Ada shook herself and got moving, heading back to the door that led to the lower east wing. The lobby was safe enough from the virus carriers. They didn't seem to understand the concept of doorknobs, but there were threats besides the infected. God only knew that Umbrella might send a cleanup, or from what had been freed from the laboratory when the leak occurred. Less frightening, but just as bothersome, were the live cops that might still be trooping around, looking for someone to save. She'd heard gunfire some distant, some not, every hour or 3 since she'd gone to ground. There were still at least a few uninfected left in the expansive old building, trying to convince a panicky He-Man with a gun that she was alive and didn't want an escort, made facing the undead seem almost appealing. Walking on the balls of her feet to avoid additional noise, Ada slipped through the doors and then leaned against it at the end of the long hall, safe to decide on her next move. Although she hadn't checked out the basement yet, there were still several carriers wandering around in the detective's room. The hall's doors were all closed. If someone or something wanted to get at her, she'd be able to see it coming and get out in time. Ah, the exciting life of a freelance agent. Traveling the world, earn money by stealing important things, fight off the living dead when you haven't showered or eaten a decent meal in 3 days. Impress your friends! She reminded herself again to insist on a bonus. When she had arrived in Raccoon less than a week before, she thought she'd been prepared. The maps had been studied, the reporter's files memorized, her cover story set. A young woman looking for her boyfriend, an umbrella scientist. That part was almost true. In fact, it had been her brief relationship with John Howe 10 months before that had landed her the job. More of a one-night stand, actually, and not a very good one at that, but John had thought otherwise, and his connection to Umbrella, though it had probably killed him, had turned out to be a lucky break for her. So she'd been ready, but within 24 hours of her self-assured check-in at Raccoon City's nicest hotel, her luck had changed. While eating dinner in a vinyl-encased and mostly empty lounge in the Arclay Inn, she'd heard the first screams outside. The first, but by no means the last. In some ways, the disaster was an asset. There'd be no guards posted around the lab, no endless covert trial runs. The prep work she'd done on the T-virus had assured her that the airborne was short-lived and dissipated quickly. The only chance of catching it at this point would be thorough contact with the carrier, so it wasn't a problem. So that wasn't a problem. And once she and a couple of dozen others had made it to the police station, she'd seen that Bertolucci was among them. Even with the undead factor, it initially looked like things were going in her favor. Mission objectives. Question the hack, find out how much he knows, and kill him or ignore him, depending. Retrieve a sample of the new virus, Dr. Birkin's latest wonder. No problem, right? 3 days before, with the knowledge of how Umbrella's lab connected to the sewers and Bertolucci standing right in front of her, the job had looked pretty wrapped. And of course, that's when things had started to go wrong. The rearranged station with the room shifted around, and after the STARS fiasco, making half my preparations obsolete, people disappearing, the barricades kept coming down, Police Chief Irons throwing off commands like some cut-rate dictator still trying to impress Mayor Harris and his whiny daughter even as the dead piled up. She watched Bertolucci closely, enough to see that he was going to duck and run, but had missed the exit. She hadn't even had time to make contact before he had disappeared somewhere into the maze of the station, losing himself in the commotion of the first wave of attacks. Ada had decided to fly solo herself when 3/4 of the civilians were wiped out in a single mass assault not an hour later, which is interesting that this little detail is actually reconfirmed in the Outbreak series. So that's kind of a fascinating detail that happened long before those games came out. So I'm wondering if they took inspiration from this novel. In fact, I think Emmy's Diner shows up in the that, at least a diner shows up in it. Ada herself had decided to fly solos herself when 3/4 of the civilians were wiped out in a single mass assault not an hour later, all because no one had bothered to lower the garage gates. She wasn't willing to die to keep up her cover as the frightened tourist. She wasn't willing to die to keep her cover up as a frightened tourist looking for her boyfriend. And so came the wait. Almost 50 hours of waiting for things to settle, tucked in the clock tower on the 3rd floor, slipping downstairs to find food or use the bathroom, and lengthened stretches of time between gunplay. Between the echoing clatter of shots and the screams. Terrific. So now you're out, and what do? Stand around and reflect. Get on with it. The sooner you finish, the sooner you can collect your wages and retire on some nice island somewhere. Still, for a moment, Ada didn't move, tapping the muzzle of her Beretta absently against one long stockinged leg. There were 3 bodies sprawled in the hallway. She couldn't stop staring at one of them, crumpled beneath the window counter halfway down the corridor. A woman in cut-off shorts and a halter, her legs cruelly displayed, one arm crooked above her blood-soaked head. The other two were cops, no one she recognized, but the woman had been one of the people she talked to when she first made it to the station. Her name had been Stacy something or other, a nervous but strong-willed girl just out of her teens. Stacy Kelso, that was it. She'd run into town to pick up some ice cream and had ended up caught in the takeover. Yet in spite of her own predicament, she was more concerned about her parents and little brother still at home. A conscientious girl. A good girl. Why was she thinking about it? Stacy was dead, a ragged hole in her left temple, and Ada hadn't capped her. It wasn't like she had anything to feel personally responsible about. She'd come in on a job, and it wasn't her fault that Raccoon had gone Nova. Maybe it's not guilt, some part of her whispered. Maybe you're just worried she didn't make it. She was a person after all, and now she's dead as her parents and kid brother probably are. Snap out of it, she said softly, but with an edge of irritation. She tore her gaze from the woman's pathetic form, fixing it instead on a broken ashtray at the end of the hall. Feeling bad about things she couldn't control wasn't her style. It wasn't how she'd gotten to the top of her trade, but considering how much Mr. Trent was putting up to retain her services, now wasn't the best time to be analyzing her empathy skills. For those who have read the novels before, Mr. Trent is a very familiar name. He came up very big in the original novel. He's an original character by S.T. Perry, though, so he's not technically canon. The people died. People died, and it was the way of the world. And if she learned anything in the course of life, it was that agonizing over that particular truth was pointless. Mission objectives: talk to Bertolucci, get the G-Virus sample. That was all she needed to worry about. There was a mechanism that Ada still had to check, a few twisted passages away from where she stood, in the press conference room. Trent's note on the architect's latest addition to the station had been sketchy, but she knew it had to do with ornate sculpted gas lamps in an oil painting. Whoever had commissioned all the work had one serious secret life going on. There were actual hidden passages upstairs behind the wall of what had once been a storage room. She hadn't gone through them yet, although a quick glance had told her that the room itself had been remodeled as an office. Judging from the overstuffed and neurotically macho decor, it was probably Irons. Even from the short time she'd been in his company, she'd ascertained that he wasn't the most stable man who had ever walked. There was no question that he was on Umbrella's payroll, but there was also something about him that was just screamed dysfunctional. Ada stared down the hall, her dress flats clicking loudly on the scuffled blue tiles. As she was already dreading yet another time-consuming mechanical puzzle. Not that there was any help for it. She had assumed from the beginning that the virus was still in the lab, but she couldn't afford to take any chances on passing up an earlier retrieval. The files indicated that there were between 8 and 12 1-ounce vials of the stuff, information from a 2-week-old video feed, and Birkin's lab was far from impenetrable. With the underground lab connected to the station through the sewer remains, she had entertained the possibility that the samples had been moved. Besides, Bertolucci could be tucked away in the research library or in the STAR's office on the west side, maybe the dark room. Dead or not, he had to be found. And it would also give her a chance to collect a few more 9mm clips from the fallen RPD. Magazines! She followed the passage as it led past a small waiting area, complete with vending machines that had already been pried open and ransacked. As with the rest of the station, the corridor was cold and badly in need of air freshener. She'd grown used to the smell, but the chill was murder. For the 100th time since abandoning her table at the Arclay, Ada wished that she had dressed more casually for dinner. The sleeveless, tight red tunic dress and clattery shoes were fine for cover. As a mission gear, however, the outfit was somewhat less than practical. You see, another reason I love these novels, they acknowledge how silly the dress is, but they give a reasonable explanation why she's wearing it. It's great. As she reached the end of the hall and carefully opened the door to her left, weapon half raised. She reached the end of the room. As before, the corridor was clear, yet another testament to the fading elegance of the building. Dusky, sand-colored walls and symmetrical patterned tiles as in this one. The station must have been magnificent once, but years of serving as institutional facility had leached away its grandeur. The tattered grand movie house look and the cold, hopeless atmosphere created a distinctly sinister feeling, as if any moment a cold hand could fall across your shoulder, a soft gust of diseased breath whisper across the back of your neck. Ada frowned again after this job. After this job, she was going to take a very long vacation. Either that or it was time to find a new career. Her concentration, her ability to focus, wasn't what it used to be. In her business, a slip up in the wrong time could and in her business, a slip up at the wrong time could literally mean death. Big bonus. Trent smells. Big bonus. Trent smells like money. I'll ask 7 digits. High 6 minimum. In her attempts to go through, to let her thoughts go, to let animal awareness take over, she found that she couldn't keep out the persistent image that crept into her mind. A memory of young Stacy Kelso anxiously pushing her hair behind her ear as she talked about her baby brother. After what felt like a very long time, Ada shook the troublesome vision and continued down the hall, promising herself that there would be no more lapses of conversation, and wondering why she couldn't make herself believe it. Lapses of concentration, not conversation. She's such a good character in this. Let's see, how many pages do we got left? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 pages. We'll go to the end of the chapter 7, and then we're done for the day. Sound good to everyone? We'll go with that? All right. You don't get a word in it. I'm doing it anyway. So I'm probably going to butcher this. Leon's boots scuffed the shards of the broken glass across the floor of the Kendo gun shop as he snapped open the drawers, ash-stained sweat trickling down his face. If he couldn't find 50s pretty quickly, he was screwed. The few weapons still remaining in the rival shop were inaccessible. Strung up with steel cable in the front, and the front pictured window was completely smashed. It wouldn't take long for the creatures to find him. He was down to his last round, and he still had a couple of blocks to go. Come on, 50 cal Action Express. Somebody in Raccoon must have ordered them. Yes! Fourth drawer under the deer rifle case, a half dozen empty clips, and as many boxes of ammo. Leon grabbed a box and turned, slapping it on the counter as he glanced hurriedly at the front of the small shop. Still clear if he didn't include the dead guy on the floor. He wasn't moving, but from the freshness of the wounds that oozed from his considerable gut, staining his strappy white tee, Leon wouldn't have long to linger. He didn't know how long it took for the freshly dead to stand up, and didn't really want to find out. Gotta do it fast anyway. It's like I'm a beacon for these things, and this place is easy access. Gaze darting between the crashed front wall and his skittered hands, Leon started to load up. He'd lugged across a gun dealer, having forgotten entirely about it in dizzying, nightmarish run from the wreck. When the fastest route to the station had hurried out to be blocked by a pileup, the best detour was through Kendo's. It was coincidence that had undoubtedly saved his life. Even killing 2 of the ex-living on his way, he'd nearly been overwhelmed by the sheer number of them. A ghastly skeletal form staggered out from the street's shadows, drunkenly aimed at the front of the shop. Hell, Leon muttered, his fingers somehow managing to go faster. 1 clip down, 1 more, and he could take a rest. If he bolted now, he'd be dead before he could make it to the station. Another leprous figure was suddenly standing at the mostly empty frame of the shop's glass entrance. The decay was so bad on his legs that Leon could see maggots squirming through the fibrous muscle. 4, 5, done! He snatched up the magnum and ejected the clip, reloading it as the mostly empty hit the floor. The maggoty creature was shouldering its way through the jagged corners of the glass, still attached to the frame, something liquid in his throat gurgling softly. Bag! He needed a bag. Leon fervently swept the space behind the counter, stopping on a grease-stained gym bag propped up against a stool in the back of the corner. 2 running steps and he had it, dumping the contents as he ran back to the pile of clips and loose bullets on the counter. Cleaning equipment rattled across the linoleum as Leon swept the clips into the bag, ignoring the scattering sounds in favor of the ammo drawer. The decayed monster was shuffling towards him, stumbling on the body of the pot-bellied dead man, and Leon could smell how rotten it was. He jerked the magnum up and leveled it at the creature's face. The head, just like the 2 outside. With a tremendous thundering kick, the gurgling pulpy skull blew apart, thick fluid splattering the shop walls and display cases in a wet slap.
Before the decapitated mass could crumple, Leon spun and dropped into a crouch by the ammo drawer. He shoveled the heavy boxes into the nylon sack. His stomach knotted and shaking from the fear that even now, the back alley could be filling up with more of them, cutting him off from where he needed to go. The details are fantastic in this novel. Pushing off from his couch, Leon shouldered the bag and ran for the back door. From the corner of his vision, he saw another creature. Okay, no, I'm not. He saw another creature had made it inside Kendo's. From the crunch of the powdered glass, there were more of them filling in just behind. He opened the exit door and slid through, glancing left and right as the door settled close, the automatic lock catching with a soft metal snick. Nothing but garbage cans and recycling bins overflowing with mildewed waste. From where he stood, the alley stretched off to his left and then hooked left again. If his internal compass was still working, the narrow, cluttered passage would take him straight to Oak, letting him out less than a block away from the station. So far, he had been lucky, and all he could do was hope that his fortune would hold out. Would let him get to the RPD building alive and in one piece, and, God willing, find a heavily armed contingent of people who knew what the hell was going on. And Claire. Be safe, Claire. Be safe, Claire Redfield, and if you get there before me, don't lock the door. Leon repositioned the laden weight of the ammo across his back and steadied down. Oh, I forgot. I dropped my ball. Didn't realize that dropped. Easy ball. Don't roll away again. There. Leon repositioned the laden weight of the ammo across his back and started down the dimly lit alley, ready to blow apart anything that got in his way. Side note, the Desert Eagle you don't get till much later in the game. You start out with a typical handgun, becomes the Matilda, which is his signature weapon. But I actually like that he starts out with the Magnum here because it's a very different, very powerful signature weapon for Leon. And it's nice to have something that outright kills zombies, but still does struggle against bigger things, even though it's super powerful. It's an interesting touch that he starts out with the Magnum and doesn't need to get it. Because it kind of removes the aspect from the game that you have to scramble around looking for better weapons. He starts out with his best weapon. It's a nice touch, I think, to kind of streamline the story. Claire almost made it without having to shoot. The zombies that trickled out of the streets of Raccoon were relentless but slow, and the adrenaline pumping through her system made it easy to dodge them. She figured they were drawn out by the sounds of the wreck, then just followed their noses or whatever was left of them. Of the 10 or so that made it close enough for her to get a good look, at least half were in advanced stages of decay, flesh falling from the bone. She was so busy watching the street and trying to sort through what happened, she almost ran right past the police station. She'd been to the RPD building twice before to visit Chris, but had never entered from the back, or in the cold, stinking dark, pursued by malignant cannibals. A crashed cop car and a handful of zombified officers had clued her in, sending her through a small parking lot and some kind of an equipment shed that opened into a tiny paved courtyard. A courtyard where she and Chris had eaten lunch once, sitting on top steps that led up to the station's second floor helipad. As simply as that, she made it in. Oh, she'd made it. Not made it in. She's not in yet. Weaving past the two stumbling uniformed corpses that wandered aimlessly across the L-shaped ward was easy, and it was such a relief to be somewhere she recognized, to know she was about to be safe that she didn't see the woman until it was almost too late. A wailing dead woman with one limply hanging arm and gore-streaked shredded tank top who reached out from the shadows at the base of the stairs and brushed Claire's arm with cold, scabby fingers. Claire let out a strangled yelp of surprise, stumbling back from the creature's outstretched hand, and nearly fell into the arms of another one, a tall, broad-shouldered, rotting man who had emerged from beneath the metal stairs, graceless yet silent. She dodged sideways and pointed the 9mm at the man and backed up a step, and felt her calf hit an unyielding railing in the back steps of the roof. The woman was 5 feet to her right, the torn, bloody shirt exposing one gouged breast, and the hand of her working arm grasping towards Claire. The man was one step from reaching the distance, and she couldn't back up any further. Claire pulled the trigger, and there was a mammoth boom. The gun jerked almost out of her hand. The right half of the tall man's slack and withered face disappeared in a burst of dark liquid streams gushing from the shattered skull. She whipped the gun around, tightening her grip, and she aimed at the woman's pallid, moaning face. Another blast of deafening sound, and the rising moan was cut off, the waxen forehead imploding in a spray of blood and bone chips. The woman went over backwards, crashing against the pavement like a corpse, which she already was. They won't be walking away from this one. It was as if everything finally caught up to her at once, the reality of the situation driven home when she'd pulled the trigger. For a moment, Claire couldn't move. She stared down at the two crumpled sacks of ruined flesh. Wow, you guys that delayed? Wow, the delay must be really strong. For a moment, Claire couldn't move. She stared down at the two crumpled sacks of human flesh, at two people she had just shot, and felt like she was only an inch or two from losing it. She'd grown up around guns, been shooting ranges dozens of times, but with a .22 target pistol firing at pieces of paper. Targets that didn't bleed or spew brain matter like the two human beings she just shot. No. A cool voice inside her head interrupted. Not human, not anymore. Don't kid yourself and don't waste time on remorse. Leon could be inside by now, looking for you, and if Stars had got called in, Chris could be here too. If that weren't motivation enough, two cops that Claire had passed when she had first hit the courtyard were on their way, boots shuffling and dragging across the flagstones. It was time to go. She jogged up the stairs, barely able to hear the clangs of her steps over the high-pitched ringing in her ears. The 9mm blast had done a temporary number on her hearing, which explained why she didn't know about the helicopter until she was almost on the roof. Claire hit the second to top riser and stopped dead, a whipping sound pounding rhythmically at her bare shoulders as the giant black vehicle hovered into view, half lost in shadow. It was near the ancient water tower that bordered the helipad at the southwest corner, though she couldn't tell if it had just been taken off or was coming to land. Couldn't tell and didn't care. Hey! She shouted, raising her left hand in the air. Hey, over here! Her words were lost in the billowing dust that swirled across the roof, drowned by the steady chop of the copter's blades. Claire waved wildly, feeling like she had just hit the lottery. Somebody came! Thank God! Thank God! Thank you! A blaring searchlight snapped on from the midsection of the hovering birds, scrawled across the roof, and was going in the wrong direction, away from her. Claire waved more frantically, drawing her breath to call out again, and saw what the spotlight saw, even as she heard desperate, mostly unintelligible shouts beneath the helicopter's roar. A cop, standing at the helipad corner opposite the stairs, backed against an elevated section of the roof. He held what looked like to be a machine gun and appeared to be very much alive. Get over here! The officer shouted at the helicopter, his voice tinging with panic. Claire saw that and felt relief evaporate. There were two zombies lurching through the darkness of the helipad, headed for the well-lit target that was the shouting cop. She raised the 9mm and then lowered it, helplessly, afraid of hitting the cornered man. The spotlight didn't waver, illuminating the horror with brilliant clarity. The cop didn't seem to realize how close the zombies were until they were grabbing for him, their stingy arms extending into the beam of fixated white light. Stay back! Don't come any closer! He cried with pure terror in his voice. Claire heard him perfectly, just like she heard the howling scream as the two decaying figures obscured her view, reaching him at the same time. The sound of his automatic weapon ripped across the helipad, and even over the helicopter's clamor, Claire could hear the whining ting of bullets flying wild. She dropped, knees cracking against the top step as the weapon's clattering fire went on, and there was a chance in the sound of the copter, a strange hum that rose quickly. There was a change, sorry, not chance. I'm starting to go cross-eyed. Hey, perfect. You made it for the last chapter. And there was a change in the sound of the helicopter, a strange hum that rose quickly into a mechanical scream. Claire looked up and saw the giant craft dip down, the back end swinging around an erratic, jerking arc. Jesus, he hit them! The copter spotlight was going all directions at once, flashing across the metal pipes and concrete. Dying struggles of Cop, somehow still firing as the two monsters tore at him. And the helicopter was coming down, teetering sideways, its blades slamming into the brick of the elevator roof with a tremendous crash. Before Claire could blink, the nose of the craft hit, plowing across the helipad in a curtain of screeching sparks and flying glass. The explosion happened just as the mammoth machine slid to a stop at the southeast corner, directly on top of the fallen cop and his killers. The rattling whoosh of the machine gun was finally cut off in the whoosh of the flames that sprang up at the initial sputtering of the boom. In the initial sputtering boom. I promise I'm not this inarticulate for those who are just now joining in. Anyone that might just be now joining in. I'm just finally reaching the end of what I can actually say. Claire stood on her legs, on legs she barely felt, staring at disbelief at the leaping fire and dominated almost half the helipad. It had happened all too fast for her to feel like it had happened at all, and the smoking, burning evidence at the front only made her sense of unreality greater. An acrid, sickly sweet odor of burning meat wafted over her on the wave of heated air, and in the sudden silence she could hear a soft groan of the zombies down in the courtyard. She shot a look at the stairs and saw that both the dead cops were at the foot, blindly and uselessly falling against the bottom step. At least they couldn't climb. Can't climb stairs. Claire turned to the frightened glance towards the door. See, at least they couldn't climb. Can't climb stairs. Claire turned to the frightened glance towards the door that led to the RPD building, maybe 30 feet from the curling, popping flames that were slowly eating the body of the copter. Except for the stairs, it was the only way onto the roof, and if the zombies couldn't climb, then I'm in some deep shit. The station isn't safe. She stared thoughtfully at the burning wreckage, weighing her options. The 9mm held a lot of ammo, and she still had 2 full clips. She could head back to the streets, look for a car with keys in it, and go for help. Except what about Leon? And that cop that was still alive? What if there were more people inside, planning to escape? She thought she held up pretty well on her own so far, but she also knew that she'd feel safer if somebody else were in charge. A riot squad would be okay, though she'd settle for some battle-scarred veteran cop with a shitload of guns. Or Chris. Claire didn't know if she'd find him at the station, but she firmly believed that he was still alive. If anyone was equipped to handle himself in a crisis like this one, it was her brother. Whether or not she found anyone, she shouldn't take off without telling Leon. If she didn't, blowing town instead, and he got killed looking for her. Decision made, Claire walked for the entrance, carefully skirting the blaze and scanning the flickering shadows for movement. When she'd reached the door, she closed her eyes for a second, one sweating hand on the latch. I can do this, she said quietly, and although she didn't sound confident as she would have liked, at least her voice didn't tremble or break. She opened her eyes and then the door. When nothing jumped out at her from the softly lit hallway, she slipped inside. And that, my friends, is the prologue through Chapter 7 of Resident Evil City of the Dead. How do you all enjoy it? How did this go? I want some feedback on the stream, because I want to do more like these, but I don't know how well received they might be. So I would like your guys' feedback on whether or not you would like to see more of these. Only 10 watching. Who left? The delay between this and the comments are fucking ridiculous. Do I have some kind of delay thing set? Let me see. No delay. Yeah, this is coming through really slowly on my Streamlabs. Let's see. I know it's a book, and then so those are you just now tuning in. Yes, City of the Dead is the novelization of Resident Evil 2. Rujab, just please stop. That's weird. Stop that. I literally just turned in less than a minute ago. I am sorry. I'm sorry that you got in at the tail end, but luckily the video is there for you to watch. It'll be up. I will not delete this. I should probably have some honey and tea. That would be nice. Yeah, so this, I had fun doing this. I don't know if the future ones will be quite as long. I had planned to go 3 hours. I could only last 2. I have an entire review about that on my channel, so go ahead and check that out, Skur. I could gush about that game, but it was I loved it. I loved it. It's just short, plain and simple. But for now, I'm gonna go get something to eat because I've not eaten anything today. Get something to rest my throat with, and I will hopefully catch you guys in the next one. So catch you all on the flip side.